I have seen many female counterparts, peers, folks that have worked alongside me, that they have just stayed into the middle of the pack a little bit. I don't want to seem too abrasive, or I don't want to make a fool of myself, or my thoughts aren't important. And if you say or you think those things, you really are limiting yourself.
Hey y'all, welcome to Selling with Social, the podcast that helps marketers increase marketing qualified leads, sales reps to shatter sales results, and sales leaders to grow as leaders. Each show, we interview sales, marketing, and social media practitioners, leaders, and influencers to help you connect, close more deals, build stronger relationships with clients, and improve your sales productivity. I'm Mario Martinez Jr. You're now listening to Selling with Social. My friend Christine Pavalon, the great, the wonderful. I am super excited to have you here on Selling with Social, my friend. Thank you for joining me.
I am so excited to be here. It's been too long coming, but I'm just thrilled to have the opportunity today, Mario. Thank you.
Well, when you're a busy executive, getting promoted all the time, moving up through the ranks, I get the idea that finally you get around to getting some time with me.
You finally invited me. Come on now.
Ah, there we go. I like it. I'm excited, actually, for those of you listening in right now, to my dear friend, Christine Pavalon. She and I actually worked together at a former software collaboration company. And in fact, she was the individual that was kind of the closer of whether or not the company should hire me or not. And I came on board. We were peer regional VPs. I left the organization, and Christine kept getting promoted. And now you're off on a new venture as the VP of sales for Avtex. Is that correct?
I am. I'm so excited. It's a great new adventure I'm on, and it's just so exciting. Every day I wake up can't wait to start, getting back after it, starting building something new. It's such a kind of a good feeling, and I love it.
And what I love about you, Christine, is the statistics show, I think the last time I checked, was that only 12% of sales leadership are made up of women in leadership. Mm-hmm. And what I really love about you is not only have you become a friend, a trusted source, somebody that I ping ideas and thoughts off of, but also you've made it to the top. You've had indirect channels, you've had direct channels, you've managed a very large field sales organization. And I don't know if I can say this, but I'm going to tell people anyways. My dear friend Christine Pavalon is up for Women Sales Leader of the Year award in the category of field sales. Is that right?
It is. It was such an honor because I was nominated for that by both my previous employer and my current employer for that position. And knowing that folks that I've had the ability to help work alongside for many years thought that much of me and nominated me, it was just really a special moment. And yeah, we just finished the final judging day last week, and final awards will be given out in mid-June. So fingers crossed. I will be the winner. I'm already the winner, but that I'll win that award, right?
That's right. I love the attitude. I'm a winner already, but I want to win that award. I like it. Well, Christine, we've got sales leaders, we've got sales people, we've got marketing leaders, sales enablement leaders that are listening in right now. Do me a favor, tell us one thing, something juicy, one thing about you that nobody would know by looking at your social profiles.
I think the first thing is to know that it's actually funny when Mario and I first came to know each other, I was so reluctant to jump in the social selling pool. It was like I was, wanting to cling onto my phone to cold call all day and send emails. And I was like, what are you talking about, Mario? We're going to prospect online. I'm going to write blogs. And it was something that at first was really elementary. My page was kind of embarrassing, to be honest. But I took some great tips from Mario along the way. Got some nice banner splashes, started to talk about my work life as well as some of my interests with charity work. And then I have a lot of recommendations on my page, which I'm so proud of. But I'm also, what's it TLC? Ain't too proud to beg?
Ain't too proud to beg.
Ain't too proud to beg. I will ask you for a recommendation, my friend. So some of those are people that gave them to me and just did it out of the kindness of their hearts. And others were people that I really wanted their voice on my page and reached out to them and said, hey, would you please go ahead and recommend me? And, it's funny, if you ask that, very rarely will someone say no. Well, at least in my case, because hopefully that meant that they thought a lot of me. But that's one of the things as I've done subsequent job interviews, Mario, that everyone has always commented on is I've never seen such glowing reviews and recommendations on a LinkedIn profile before. So that's a proud moment for me. Nothing like salacious, but I think the funniest part was at first I was definitely a skeptic in the social pool.
Well, truth be told, actually, when I launched the program with the company that we were both at, it took me 9 months to get it approved. And the person that was, I wouldn't say blocking, but the person I had to convince was right here on this call with me right now, Christine Pavalon. And once she gave her blessing, I got some funding approved for it.
Yeah, but it was good. But it's funny, our old industry was a company that was in transition. They had done telco for so long. That's like an old grinder on the phone, and they were coming into software, and times have changed. The market's changed, and there needed to be an adapting of thought. You couldn't do everything the same way. So it was definitely a moment that you challenged me on, but you showed me the proof was in the pudding, and I'm so glad that I listened.
I love it. Well, you are now off and running to great new things with Avtex as the VP of Sales. And, one of the things that is near and dear to my heart is talking about an issue that we have in sales and sales leadership. And that is women and minorities and the ability to be able to have a more diverse workforce and work group. And what I really love, Christine, I have grown to respect you in a very significant way, not only because you just get the job done, right? Like I have never seen you not succeed, but also I just loved your style, right? It was aggressive. It was direct. It was like, let's do this. Let's make it happen. And I'm not saying that's the style that needs to win if you're a woman. I'm just saying I really love that about you. But I think there's been some great challenges that women in leadership specifically have experienced. And I'd love for you to just talk about that so that, as our listeners start thinking about, how do we make our sales force more diverse? Some of these things that you've experienced personally and or, things that you may quote can resonate well with them. So talk a little bit about some of the great challenges that you've seen women face in leadership.
Yeah, I think, one thing I would say as a woman that I would say, please never apologize for and always own is where you are in your life. There was a big portion of my career, almost 12 years, that I was very content. That doesn't mean I wasn't very good, but I was very content at a certain job level. And quite honestly, at that point in time, I was very focused on other aspects of my life. During that time, I had 3 children and I worked from home and I elevated my career, but I hit a point where I needed to be challenged. I needed to grow. And at that point in time, I went back into the office, a new company, and took on some new roles. And how I elevated up that ladder, because if you look at my transition, I started as a sales engineer. Yeah. And then I would move from a sales engineer to a director of sales engineers, to a regional vice president of sales, to, up the chain. And the reason I would say, why did that happen is one, I constantly always took the step forward. And whether you are a woman, whether you are a minority, whether you are a person, a male, it doesn't matter who you are, you have to challenge the box. If everybody just lives inside the box in the perimeter and says, this is the way we do it and this is how we've always done it, quite honestly, you're just another cog in the wheel. So looking at every opportunity and saying, hey, we're really good where we are, but what if we elevated these 1 or 2 items and then speak up on that? Speak up and challenge it. And there were a couple times, quite honestly, I did speak up and it wasn't seen well. And I had to hold that ground. I had to say, no, yes, I did say that. And here's the reason why, and here's why I believe it to be true. But I always did it with a sense of kindness and respect as I gave my views. Nobody wants to just have a pit bull in the room that doesn't have respect for the rest of the audience. Whether what sex you are, it doesn't matter. But having the idea and stepping forward and not being afraid to fail and knowing where you want to go and grow at a given moment. I knew at that point when I went back and I re-engaged kind of full in the deep end of my career and said, hey, I really want to grow, that I was willing to really network myself. I was willing to go ahead and establish relationships, get on different committees, do some mentoring of different folks. And again, as I mentioned to you, never shy to self-promote, never shy to say, hey, let me hold up this as a model for others. And you tell me, if this is something you can use. And yes, are there people, I'm sure, have I heard things along the way about, and it's something that we love to say about women is why they move up the line. And many times it's not anything to do with their professional skills at all. It's, oh, she's a pretty girl, or, oh, I think she is flirting with this one or that one. And it's like, no, that has absolutely nothing to do with anything. The problem that you have in your limitation that maybe I don't is I'm working longer hours. I'm throwing more ideas out. I'm not afraid to look the fool, quite honestly. I'm really not, because the best lessons I've ever learned were, quite honestly, where I played the fool and then I learned and I said, well, I won't do that again.
Right.
But I think for women, it's different things. Don't feel guilty about where you are in your life. There is nothing wrong with being satisfied at a certain career level, but then also self-recognize when you want to elevate or when you want to maybe try a new job or a new role. And then you really have to go into it full force. You have to step forward. Because believe me, right now, there's been so many times where I'm the only female in a conference room. I'm really blessed. I have another female leader here at Avtex with me, and I love that she and I are both kind of bouncing and surging Avtex forward with women leadership. That's great, but that hasn't been something I've always had in my career as another woman in the room with me. So it's one of those pieces where you have to go ahead and you have to push the envelope professionally, but I also would never, ever downplay the social networking aspect of it. Being someone that people like. Okay, that doesn't mean they have to like me, again, for any other reason besides of who I authentically am. But being someone that is kind and respectful and helping other people along the way and just really out there social networking, those are the important pieces, I think, for women to lean into. Again, I always laugh and tell everybody, and I'm sorry if any of our alumni are listening, but I went to Southern Illinois University. And if you know anything about Southern Illinois University, you're there because you're a partier. You're not there because you're a high academic in most cases, okay? So my parents were like, well, she's a people person. Let's just get her a degree. She'll go out there. She'll do fine, And that's great. I got the degree and I went out there. But everything else that happened was just a matter of me taking timing, listening to myself, where I wanted to be, and then having the confidence to push forward, but also build relationships and mentor along the way.
I go back to when we sat in the leadership room together. If I'm not mistaken, I think you were the only female across, multiple VPs across the country. Am I wrong? I think you were the only one, right?
Most of the time, yeah. Most of the time, we would generally have other females that might join us from other departments, but from sales, I would be the only female in the room. Okay.
But what was interesting though, and you said something earlier, which I think needs to probably just be repeated here. And that was that you challenged the box and you spoke up, right? That's something that you've done. And without a doubt, when we sat in the leadership room together, anytime Christine Pavalon spoke, everybody listened because what you said was challenging the system, and you spoke up to challenge other people's thoughts, methodology, process, good, bad, or the ugly, whatever it might be. And I think a lot of, whether you are a man or a woman or minority or not, a lot of folks, they confuse kindness and respect with not speaking up and challenging someone if they believe that they're wrong or that's the wrong way or that's the wrong thought process, right? So can you just talk about that in terms of, from a woman in sales perspective, have you ever been in those positions where people have looked at you and said, yeah, well, thanks, Christine, but no, right? Or have you always just been that type of individual that, you assert your thought process and people have listened? Did it come naturally?
I think every person has been dismissed at some point in time, as they've tried to deliver a message. I think it's really important that you know your audience, that you know at certain points who you're meeting with. Sometimes the level of frankness I could have with my peers in a room and challenge you and push you a little bit further would be a much different dynamic that I might take with a prospect at that point in time. Again, I think one of the things that has always worked for me, though, is I am very authentic. What you see is what you get. This is me. It's not an act. And I will challenge you in that room, but I'll also be the first person to come up next to you and congratulate you on a win or a success, or say, hey, you know what? I was really wrong. Can you teach me this? I think you have to make sure your communication isn't constantly you telling everybody what you think, because there is no special knowledge that I have, right? Much of it's instinct, but a lot of it is I might be wrong at given times, or I might want someone else to kind of challenge me and say, no, Christine, I know that you think that we should run our sales metrics like this, but here's why I think we need to shift it, and make me pause, make me have that thought. But that should be where growth comes from in any organization and team. And I think when you can foster that, really good things happen. But I think, unfortunately, I have seen many female counterparts, peers, folks that have worked alongside me, that they have just stayed into the middle of the pack a little bit. I don't want to seem too abrasive, or I don't want to make a fool of myself, or my thoughts aren't important. And if you say or you think those things, you really are limiting yourself. And you're limiting yourself not only from a career growth move. I mean, that's great that you can be promoted and you can move forward, but just a growth moment overall. Just gaining perspective and learning and honing in on your craft that only comes with cultivated conversation. So I would just say, no matter what, you have to have those conversations, but you have to be authentic in yourself when you do so.
So I wrote down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items that you said here about, women in leadership and some of the great challenges, but you put them in the positive light. And I'll repeat exactly what you just said, which was always take the step forward, challenge the box and speak up, do so with kindness and respect. That was number 3. Don't be afraid to fail, and mentor and volunteer for committees. And that's how you can be found. Now, I would argue that this is not any different between whether you're a man looking to become the next VP of sales or whether you're a woman looking to become the next VP of sales. The formula that you just gave is the same. Wouldn't you agree?
In many cases it is, but I think societal norms also, for many women, when you are speaking up, depending on how you've been raised, depending on, again, the ratio of men to women in a setting. Think about it. We would go to our management meetings, there'd be 12 guys, and I'd be the only female that might be sitting there. Those can be intimidating factors.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that that's really, no, it's not some secret sauce for women, but it's more women saying, you know what? And I'd say the kindness one, the only thing I would add to that, Mario, that women have a tendency to do is be kind and be respectful, but never be apologetic. I always love I don't want to offend you, but I'm sorry, but don't apologize. If you believe it to be true and you think that your words are to be spoken, don't apologize for that. Own who you are in that conversation, and definitely be somebody that listens. You don't have to run your mouth all the time, but be somebody that listens and speaks when appropriate to move the ball down the field. That's the end game for whether you're a man or a woman.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're bringing up a real struggle that whether you're a woman or even a minority has, that's different than maybe others that are of the norm, which is you gave the example, if you're a woman, which was very true, we get into a room of 12 people and you'd be potentially the only woman that was sitting inside there from a sales leadership perspective. And so oftentimes you might feel like you're the minority. And as a result of feeling like the minority, you're like, maybe I shouldn't say anything, right? That is certainly one struggle that I think women have. And again, going back to the leadership stat that I heard, it's 33% of all people in sales are women, and it gets lower to 12% that are in leadership. Now, that's pretty bad. Now, if you add on top of that, how about Hispanic minorities, or Hispanic men or women? I think it even goes lower, but nonetheless, there are some real significant challenges, and feeling afraid or feeling like you're the minority could be very intimidating. What other struggles do you think women have faced than those of men in sales leadership?
One of my favorite is, again, being a mother of 3, is people love to look at me and, how do you do it? How do you, oh my gosh, how do you raise these kids and do this job? And I'm like, it's funny because the guy sitting next to me has 5 kids. And you're not asking him how he's doing it. But then you get the swing on that. It's maybe in the neighborhood, I'm not as welcomed by some of the mothers that don't have some of the higher corporate jobs. There's a little bit of judgment there. Definitely my parents are like, you're traveling again, you're gone again. So you get these pressures as a woman that, and especially a mother in many cases, oh, how do you do it? How does that happen? And I also think looks, what I wear, it's funny, people generally aren't commenting on men about their suit or whatever, but a dress or heels or whatever, it always does tend to bring a little bit more conversation. So there are these factors that come in with women in leadership, and you have to be really thoughtful about how you approach those. And again, I have no problem embracing myself as a woman. I'm very proud to be a woman. I'm very proud to feel like I own myself, whether that be my mothering role or my professional role. But I think sometimes it's funny how those cards can get played in a professional environment.
I actually never thought about that. I have heard it 1,000 times in a room. Gosh, how do you balance being a mom and, being here at work? But I've never turned around and thought about asking, gosh, how do you balance being a dad and actually going out and playing baseball with your kids and going out and wrestling and, jumping on the trampoline or whatever it all? How do you balance it? Nobody's ever asked me that question, but I hear that all the time. That's a really interesting point. I just think that generally speaking, I think of even my own mom and my own wife, and I think they're the nurturers. And I think sometimes we believe that children need them more than even times their dads. But the reality is they need both. There's a place for both.
You know what? Sometimes they need two dads. Sometimes they need two moms. Sometimes they need one mom only because she's a superstar, or one dad. Your professional life is something definitely that is a skill-based set. Now, do I want to know because I care about connecting with you about, hey, tell me about your kids. How's T-ball going, or this or that?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Don't be afraid to have those questions asked and those kind of conversations, because that's part of growing in relationship with people. But I think we have to be careful when we start to put those norms on women, like, I'm a science kind of miracle here that I'm able to have career advancement and also be a mother. And it's like, listen, there's a lot of other people doing way more serious things than I.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm going to start calling you my science experiment. But that's a good point. You really bring up a great point. I never really thought about it that way. Very, very true. And I will say this, me personally, I love a good suit or I love a good set of shoes. So I will compliment both shoes and suits on men too as well.
Well, you should. And socks. Guys can do a lot with socks too. I've seen some good fashion socks lately.
Or some bad ones. I've seen those too. You're like, man, homie, that doesn't match. Don't try to do that combo. So leadership lessons. There's a lot of folks here that are listening in that are looking at accelerating their career. And I had Kim Green-Kerr on, the Senior Vice President of Sales from Sprint Corporation, actually a couple months back. And she talked a lot about some of the things that you mentioned, which is mentoring and requesting to volunteer for different types of committees. But from a leadership perspective, I think one of the things that you bring to the table are some key important leadership lessons that you've learned and why it's valuable. And I think you wanted to share some of that with the audience here. Tell us about that.
Yeah, one of the first things, and again, it kind of ties into the front end of our conversation today, which is please never be afraid to fail. At every point in time, you should be stopping and self-reflecting. I maybe self-reflect a little bit too much, but usually about once a month, I'll give myself some quiet time for professional meditation in a sense, and kind of look back at what's gone on during that time frame, and then said, okay, how do I optimize that? How do I tweak it? And I've come up with ideas, and quite honestly, some of them have been gigantic failures. And that is okay. It is so okay to fail at an effort. Now, it is important that you look at that effort and say, when do I cut it off, right? Again, looking at that evaluation and kind of taking that reflection. But try new things, try new angles. One of the biggest challenges that I see in most organizations is there's a staleness. This is the way we've always done it. This is how we get it done. And unfortunately, fortunately in another sense, the market is moving so fast in every industry. Everything's transitioning so quickly. So if we're doing it how we've always done it, or how it works right now, we're going to have a problem as we look forward, because the market is moving so fast. We have to be looking at, where the puck's going to go, not where it is right now. So I would say, the biggest leadership lesson is definitely analyze your business, try new ideas, self-reflect and know when to pivot, cut off, adapt, or change. And the other thing I've always really been good at, and I had to perfect this in the beginning because I took it personally, is listen to criticisms. Ask for feedback. one of the bigger items I would always do with launching programs is not only would I ask my other managers or sales directors, how's it going? Give me feedback. How do we tweak it? But then I go down into the field and ask the reps, how is this impacting you? Is this just a hassle? Are you getting anything out of it? What do you need? Now, you have to be able to filter that information and put weight where appropriate. But I think the big part is also listening and making that really a very kind of cultivated, crop of what you're growing by putting in a lot of different feedback from people and then enhancing, your program as you go forward. So to me, the biggest ones have been, don't worry about being a fool. Don't worry about looking silly. Don't worry. I've never had a boss that's penalized me for failing at something because I've always recognized when to cut it off and adapt and change. I didn't live in that failure. So don't be afraid to do that. And then definitely get a circle around you of really good people that you can get feedback, but do it from multiple levels. Because if you're always doing it from one level down from you, again, you got to worry about sometimes politics and people not wanting to offend you, right? So there are going to be a lot of yes people around you going, oh, it's great, it's great. But very rarely might you get negative feedback. But if you start to go a couple levels down or other departments, those are definitely going to be areas that will help you to understand really what's going on pulse-wise on your project.
So when you talk about trying new ideas, let's put it in the real context of sales leadership, since you're a sales leader, and things that you may be trying that are relatively new, right? So maybe you're a manager, maybe you're a director, maybe you're a vice president. You talked about trying new ideas, know when to pivot, cut it off, adapt, and change, right? So that's kind of a great strategy. What are some of those things that you might consider as new ideas that somebody would try to implement and then, cut off as an example? Do you have any ideas or thoughts on that?
Yeah, so it's really interesting now coming from my previous role that was a little bit more of a commoditized service or software. In the numbers, you would have to churn on that. So how many dials would a rep have to make? How many emails would they have to make? How many social posts? How many canvassing days and networking events? Now I'm in a different space that really is more about CX consulting. And CX consulting is one of the hottest, if you go and you listen to Gartner or anybody else right now, they're telling you this is really where it's at, is what is that customer experience and why is your company different and, what's the return you're getting out of it. So for me to come here and to apply the same sales metrics as a very commoditized product and say, I want the same amount of dials, I want the same amount of emails, et cetera, that's not going to work. It's going to be a failure, right? So you start with some number setting that you believe it should be, and then you start to see what your traffic is, and then you're correlating that against your pipeline growth. And you're saying, okay, this is adding in. How did I get those opportunities? How do I go ahead and pivot a little bit more into it? Now, that might be me looking and going, hey, we're getting a lot more out of networking. I can't tell you the amount that we get out of people that are like, I like to coach soccer. And so they're getting, a ton of network from that. Or they're involved in Rotary or a variety of different social skill type environments. And then I have some other folks that do a great job with social posts, that they're getting a lot off of that. But looking at the pipeline correlation and then saying, okay, is there any vertical correlation? How do we make this a repeatable event? But knowing how to tweak it, right? And not coming in with these ideas of, well, the 100 dials a day that I did in my commoditized world is going to work here. No, it's not. It's a totally different approach in sale, and you have to recognize that. So I think knowing that and then tweaking your numbers as you go along, because there's nothing more frustrating to the salesperson than you setting goals for them that really are useless because they're not getting a return out of it and they're just getting exhausted. So that would be an example, right? I think every sales leader tries to put in some kind of KPI or cadence, but looking at your different categories and then really looking at, based on your market, based on your space, based on your rep skill set, what is the return and correlation to pipeline and making those adjustments.
Yeah. I was doing a podcast with Steve Benson, the CEO of Badger Mapping, and he came up with an idea that I think functionally I've always thought about and kind of known about, but he had a system that he had implemented, and he gave this suggestion, which was, look, on every sales team, you've got people that have a certain key skill set or knowledge set. And it may be that they're an expert on a product. Maybe they know the comp system. Maybe they are the expert in a tool. Maybe they understand the vertical so well. Whatever those, like that key skill set is, and then how do you cross-pollinate, right? So we've always known about this where, in a meeting we'd ask, hey, Susie, hey, Billy, can you talk about whatever it might be, the tool, like what's your perspective on it? And then they would give their feedback. But he actually took it one step further and said, put a process in place that actually puts them in a leadership position. So, Susie, would you be willing to actually take on this role where you're training other folks about the compensation model and that, you become the team lead? And so you start giving all these individual folks these leadership positions, if you would, to help cross-pollinate across the team. And I thought, that's a really great idea in terms of trying a new idea where you're actually formalizing it as a leader, right? And understanding the strengths and weaknesses so that you can begin to cross-pollinate where you need to cross-pollinate. And that's just probably another basic example. And I think leaders have oftentimes, we've known that. We've said, oh, yeah, we're doing that with, Billy and Susie and Bobby. These are all folks that we already have. They're our go-to people. But in this case, it's a formalized program where they've documented it. What are the things that we need? What are the areas? What are the focuses? Who's got that skill set? Boom. Let's ask them to take on a leadership role so that if they want to take it to the next level, they'll be in a position to take it to the next level. That's one thing that I came up with as well.
That's a great plan. And I think that gives everybody a lot more ownership in the business, right? Instead of just feeling like I have to go with these processes. I think oftentimes, and especially I'll even tell you right now, I told you in the beginning of the meeting, I feel invigorated right now in my new role because I'm really challenged and I know that I'm growing. It's a different space that I've been in for 20 years. And now here I am in this really hot and upcoming space. And there are some days you feel like you know it all. And there's other days you feel like, gosh, I got to go read, or I got to go, take a YouTube video or do stuff. I have to learn more. But that feeling of growth, the mental exhaustion sometimes at the end of the day, but knowing you've been challenged and knowing that you're growing, it's kind of like for me going to the gym. I never like going to the gym ever, but I always feel so good when I'm done kind of thing. Yeah. And I think probably putting different members of your team in that ownership role that you're speaking of, it's going to give them that same satisfaction as well.
Yeah. Other things I think that we commonly don't think about in terms of really helping to balance out leadership across the team and encourage and foster leadership. Do you know how many, and I know you've experienced this, but tools that companies buy for their salespeople and they're not even being used? First off, the right way, and
sure,
or even
right way.
Some people don't even like the tool, right? And like you and I were at a company together where we hated a particular, I don't know what the category is, but I don't want to say it out loud because, I don't want my friends over at the company to hate me or anything like that. But
a prospecting tool. It was a prospecting list tool.
There you go. Prospecting list tool. Yeah, exactly right. Where it saved up like 50% wrong data, right? Right? But these are some other things that we can have people take responsibility for as leaders to build them up. And I think going back to your full circle, which was, you always took the step forward. And that's a very important point. Like if I were to really think about this conversation, that we've got to be willing to take the step and put ourselves out there in a position, especially if you are a woman and you aspire to have more responsibility, or if you're a man and you aspire to have more responsibility, whatever the role is, if you aspire to have more responsibility, you got to take that step. And there's areas of opportunities that I think every person sees and they're like, if only that would change. Well, go tell people that it needs to change, right? Do something about it. And I think that was the point that you're trying to make.
Tell them that you want to change, but then come up with an idea for how to change it. Nobody, my dad told me a lesson when I was really young, and it was, Christine, nobody wants to hear about your problems, but everybody wants to hear about everything when you're winning and it's going well. And that's very true. So, for me, I generally live by the rule of 2 positives, 1 negative, right? So you can definitely, tell somebody how you want something to change, but, there's this line between complaining and being negative and then really being somebody that's contributing to that change by coming with ideas. So be the person that says, hey, I want to challenge this idea, but come up with what your alternative thought is before you put that out there.
Well, it's kind of like what you tell your kids, right? Like, look, if you're going to complain about it, tell me what you would do differently. What do you think needs to be done differently? Somehow, some way between the time that we were growing up to the time we entered in the workforce, something changed all of a sudden where it's like, oftentimes there's some people who are like, wah, 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 complain. But all right, well, what's the solution? Are you willing to actually try to implement it? You want to be on that committee? Do you want to do something about it? If you don't, then maybe don't complain.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I'm with you.
Most important characteristic that you believe every leader should possess. What do you think it is?
I think being an empathetic person, but also, empathetic, compassionate, a strong listener, but a challenger. And I gave you several different things there. But I mean, sales, if you think about it, generally we have a cast of characters, me being one of them, right? There are lots of different personalities, lots of different walks of life. And I think, if you think about teams you've been on and teams that have been really successful, it's because the gel has happened there where people respect and like and laugh and want to do well as a group and challenge each other. So I never ever would say disconnect from the personal relationship. And as you become a leader, it's such a tendency for people to pull you into like, let's look at your funnel and your Excel spreadsheet and, all of these different things that are not human centric. And I would say to you, you have got to connect with people, whether that be on your team, your peers, your customers. Relationships are where everything really happens. So I would say that's really important. So be, empathetic and kind and compassionate to others. But I would also say that you have to challenge in the same way that I challenge myself. I will challenge others. I've told people, I need you to burn your boat for me. That's a Tony Robbins piece. If anybody's ever listened to it or not listened to it, go out and Google it. It's like, oh, I'm so juiced up after that. I'm ready to go. But you have to be willing to burn your boat. You have to be willing to say, I'm not going to need this because I'm committing to going where we're going and I'm going to make it happen. No excuses, right? And you have to hold that accountability for folks. That's your role as the coach, as the leader of the team, is to challenge those people and to hold them up and congratulate them and cheer them on, but also to have that moment sometimes where you got to call them on the spot and say, hey, we're going to win or we're going to get here, but here's what you're going to need to do to elevate your game. So I think those are important parts of a leader's role, and all that comes from constant communication and really being dialed into that individual.
Okay, I'm going to do something that Christine has no idea that I'm going to do because we didn't talk about this in the pregame show. All right, Christine, you ready for it? All right, here we go. You're in a coaching session with me. Let's rewind back 2.5 years ago when we worked sideline to each other. Coach me. You're a leader. You're my peer leader, actually, matter of fact. What could I have done better? And what could I do better? What did I do great? I mean, I know I'm going back a few years, but maybe not much has changed. Talk to me.
Yeah, I think, some of the great things that you're doing right now, or you were doing then, I should say, Mario, was coming into an organization and bringing fresh ideas. You really did challenge the company, and you came with tangible ideas of where we really were not evolving ourselves from a social skill standpoint. And you were doing it in a sense that was allowing everyone from a general salesperson to a vice president to really start to engage in that game. And that was really a positive growth moment. The challenge, I tell you, is sometimes you have to recognize the pace of change within an organization. And sometimes if you go too fast and too hard and you don't make them think it's their idea, they can earmuff you and then you start to get stuck in the rudder a little bit.
So I think,
yeah. So I think, I think the coaching I would have given you then, and especially you got to remember, how many years ago was that, Mario?
It was almost 3 years ago.
3 years ago. And you got to think about even where social selling was 3 years ago, right? And then you also have to think about that business and that it historically was a little bit of a slower transitioning business.
Absolutely. That
probably coming in hot might have been like coming medium.
Yeah.
Because the message was always there. It was always right on, right? It was just a matter sometimes of getting past people's fences and making them think that it was their idea and that they were a driver in it and they had ownership in it.
There you have it, guys and gals. Live feedback and coaching taking place from, it was about 3 years ago. But probably if that all happened all over again, I'd probably come in hot. And I need someone like yourself to be able to say, well, like throttle it back to like maybe third gear instead of like fifth gear. That is such a great piece of advice, which brings me to the whole concept of, when you're trying to invoke change, you could not have teed this up unknowingly any better. when you're looking to drive change in an organization, to exactly what you just said, Christine, is you've got to understand the pace at which you're going, right? It'll get there if you can start getting the buy-in from everyone around you. And sometimes you got to take the baby steps to get to running. Agree?
Definitely. And I can be a person that is very impatient, that comes in hot and hard a lot of times too to get where I want. And those are some of the learning lessons that I've had to go with, is knowing that audience and knowing how fast you can really progress and what you count as small wins, right? To build to the big win.
Yeah, that is such a great point. And I think it comes down to being very intentional and having a plan mapped out. Like, to your point, when I came in, I'm like, oh my God, all we're doing is cold calling. And if we're still not making numbers, we got to cold call more and then more and then more. A fourth day? This is outrageous, right? We got to make change. We got to make change now. But, a different type of pace can create a more lasting and including better empirical data as well. But great point. Great conversation. Christine, if somebody actually wants to connect with you, get a hold of you, are you on Twitter? Are you on LinkedIn? What's the best way?
Yeah, I will definitely give you all my information. I'm on Twitter, so just Kristen Pavalon. I'll give you Christin Pavalon at twitter.com. And then you can always get me at Avtex, which is my new home. And again, I can't tell you how excited I am to be here and just to share. Gosh, it's so exciting, the CX space. And I can be reached at cpavalon@avtex.com.
I love it. And you'll connect with people if they want to connect with you on LinkedIn?
I would love to. Yes, please. Go ahead. And it's a great way to build our network. And if there's anything specific you want, I will tell you, I hate blind invites. That is something that I just can't stand. So please reference that you heard me speak today. Give me a reference point so I understand versus just somebody blindly asking to connect with me. Just because, I'm a little bit cautious of accepting those.
Of course. Tell her you heard Christine on Selling with Social on the podcast. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Women Sales Leader of the Year, category Field Sales, my friend, Vice President of Sales, Christine Pavalon. Fantastic conversation and fabulous insights on how to grow in leadership, how to actually excel, and how to deal with some of the challenges that women specifically face, and for that matter, anybody who's looking to grow their career. Thanks so much for joining me on that episode of Selling with Social. I hope you found as much value in that episode as I did. Here's what I want you to do next. Please go to www.vengreso.com. That's VENGRESO.com. VENGRESO.com. And make sure that you get access to our content. We've got the latest and greatest in digital sales, sales training, content marketing, and social selling strategies that are going to help you grow your sales pipeline. I look forward to having you on the next show of Selling with Social. Make sure you also go to vengreso.com/podcast to be able to get access to the latest and greatest Selling with Social episodes, along with any of the other episodes that we've got from Social Business Engines with my friend and partner, Bernie Borges. Thanks again for joining on Selling with Social.